It was the summer of 1997 when I took the research position at the Wetlands Institute in southern Maryland. I was fresh out of grad school, a biologist with idealistic dreams of discovering something that would make my name known in the academic journals. The wetlands were dense and humid, a thick tangle of reeds, moss-draped cypress trees, and half-submerged decay. The air had a constant weight to it, like breathing through a soaked cloth. Cicadas droned endlessly, and the still water gleamed with an oil-like sheen under a sun that never quite burned through the fog. The lab was small and outdated, built on stilts above the marsh. My supervisor, Dr. Hellman, was a reclusive man in his 60s, the kind of person who never quite looked you in the eyes. He had been researching gastropod behavior for over 30 years, and he spent most of his days hunched over petri dishes and microscopes, muttering in a voice too low to hear. I had only been there a week when he first told me about Lymnaea acervus, a freshwater snail species he'd recently begun studying. They weren't here last season, he said, without looking up from his notes. Now they carpet the North Marsh like a rash. Odd little things. Their shells have a spiral, but not smooth. It's jagged, like teeth. He tapped the side of his head. They're active in ways they shouldn't be. I didn't know what he meant at the time. Snails are slow, benign creatures. Harmless, really. But that was before the incident at the shack, before we lost Annie. She was a field tech, a local girl, maybe 23. Bright, full of sarcasm, and tough as an old boot. On the day it happened, she'd gone out alone to the North Marsh to collect mollusk samples. I remember watching her go, her boots sloshing through the water, dragonflies flicking past her red hair in the sun. She never came back. We found her the next morning, walking up the boardwalk to the lab with slow, shuffling steps. At first, I thought she was hurt. Her movements were stiff and strange. Her clothes were soaked, her hands streaked with black mud, and her eyes were wide and glassy, like she hadn't slept in days. When I called out, she didn't answer. She just kept walking until she bumped into the doorframe, then stood there, trembling slightly, head tilted. There was something else, something I couldn't explain then. A small spiral shape, dark and wet, just barely visible behind her ear. She didn't speak for 3 days. Wouldn't eat either. Just stared at the wall with a slack jaw and eyes that didn't blink often enough. Dr. Hellman kept her in the observation room and insisted we not involve the authorities. It was probably some kind of neurological infection, he claimed, but he wanted time to investigate. I trusted his judgment back then. On the 4th night, I was working late, cataloguing soil pH samples, when I heard something, a soft scraping, like nails on wood. It was coming from the vents. Then I heard the groaning. I rushed to the observation room, but Annie wasn't in her bed. The window was open, though it had no latch on the inside. I found her outside in the shallow marsh behind the building, standing knee-deep in the sludge. Her hands were submerged, fingers flexing in slow rhythm. As I got closer, I saw her arms were covered in tiny snails, hundreds of them, crawling up her skin, clinging to her like barnacles. She didn't flinch. Then she spoke, not with her voice, not exactly. Her mouth moved, but the sound that came out was wrong, wet and clicking, like the popping of submerged reeds. "He's coming." I ran. I didn't stop until I was locked inside the lab, my heart pounding like it would burst through my ribs. I grabbed Hellman, babbling like a lunatic, but he only rubbed his temples and said, "You saw them, didn't you?" That's when he showed me his notes. his real notes. The ones he didn't log officially. There were diagrams of the snails, sketched frantically, dozens of them. Notes about parasitic behaviors. He referenced a phenomenon in some tropical snail species that could manipulate hosts, birds in those cases. But this was new. Lymnaea acervus had developed a way to infiltrate mammalian nervous systems. They entered through the ear canal or moist tissue, latched onto spinal cords, and slowly took control of motor functions. They don't kill, Hellman whispered, sweat beading on his forehead. They puppeteer. Annie was their first, but not their last. Over the next week, we began noticing things. The marsh around the lab teemed with more snails than ever. They were all moving, slowly, yes, but with purpose. They seemed to gather near the cabin at dusk, forming a glistening black carpet outside the foundation. I began hearing noises at night, sloshing footsteps beneath the lab, clicking voices murmuring just outside the door. Each morning we found new slime trails inside, on the walls, across the kitchen table, even the ceiling once. Dr. Hellman started locking himself in his quarters and refused to come out. Then, on the seventh night, someone or something knocked. 3 slow knocks on the lab's front door. I stood staring at the doorknob. It was nearly midnight and the marsh was quiet. No wind, no frogs, no sound but the blood in my ears. Then 3 more knocks. My hand hovered over the knob, trembling. "Don't open it," came a voice behind me. Dr. Hellman, eyes bloodshot, hand hovering near a small revolver I didn't know he owned. "They can mimic us now. They remember." I backed away. The knocks continued for over an hour. Always the same rhythm. Always 3. At dawn, we found a dead heron outside the door, its eyes gone. Beak twisted open unnaturally wide. Inside its beak was a single snail, its jagged spiral shell glinting where the sun caught it. We tried to call out. The phone line was dead. The radio emitted only static. We were stranded. Hellman became erratic. He started burning snail samples in the sink, mumbling about how we should have torched the marsh when we had the chance. I wanted to leave, to trek out through the wetlands on foot, but something kept me. Maybe it was guilt for bringing this on Annie. Maybe it was the dread of what I might find outside. That night, Hellman nailed shut every window and door. He claimed the snails could move faster in the dark, that they were watching us through the cracks in the walls. I didn't sleep. The air smelled of mildew and smoke, and the walls creaked like something breathing. Around 3 a.m., I heard the boards behind me creak. I turned, but Hellman was still asleep in the bunk across the room. Yet I could feel it. Something was watching me. A soft, wet plop echoed from the ceiling. I looked up and saw a small black snail slowly descending from an air vent, a thread of mucus stretching impossibly long. I leapt up, trying to swat it, but it dropped and vanished under the table. The next morning, Hellman was gone. There was no sign of forced exit, just one of the window boards cracked inward, and a knot of slime where his pillow used to be. I searched for him through the marsh for hours, but found only more snails. They watched me, I swear. Their stalk eyes turned toward me when I moved. I thought I heard whispering in the reeds. When I returned to the lab, I found his journal. The last page was scrawled in a shaking hand. "There is no host too large, no mind too strong. It begins with the watchers, then the dreams, then the hunger." I knew I had to leave. I packed what I could and set off down the boardwalk, trying to ignore the crawling sensation on the back of my neck. I didn't look back. That was 27 years ago. The snails aren't in Maryland anymore. They've spread, reported in Louisiana, then North Carolina. There was an outbreak in a small Alaskan fishing village last winter, officially dubbed a neurological fugue disorder. But I've seen the photos. I recognize the spiral patterns. I think they're still watching me. I sleep with cotton in my ears. I haven't swum in years. I burn anything with a spiral. Sometimes, when I lie awake in the dark, I feel it, that presence, a slow, heavy gaze. And sometimes, I hear the knock.